Tentus now, Van Dracovin, Lord Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on anime series, where I review them, and let you know how you can use them in your big eyes, small mouth games, your BESM games. Now remember, these suggestions can be used to a degree to other role-playing game systems, if you choose to adapt them. But let's dive into it. I've got 2 more from 2014, and 2 more from this current season in 2017. Alright, for the 2 from 2014, I have Gokukoku no Brynhildr and Date Alive. Let's start with Date Alive. So, in an alternate near future, in Eurasia, there's this massive cataclysm, a spatial quake. 150 million people die. 30 years later, smaller spatial quakes have been felt across the world, causing more destruction. We focus on a high school student, Shido, who finds out that at the center of one of these spatial anomalies, spatial quakes, is a girl. He learns from his adopted sister that these spirits coming into our dimension, from whatever dimension they come from, are the causes of these spatial quakes. Their presence in our world brings it about. But he also learns from his adopted sister that he has a unique ability. He can seal a spirit's powers, make it that they are basically mortal like us. But to do this, he has to effectively make them fall in love with them and kiss them. And so, he goes over the course of attempting to defuse situations, to prevent spatial quakes, to keep spirits in check by having a relationship with them. And of course, they deal with the fact that they all become infatuated with him and deal with each other, and also then begin to deal with organizations which are out there that have been built to not only handle the destruction of spirits, but possibly even kill them off in order to protect the world. Threats to the spirits that are now being tried to integrate it into a more normal society to learn what humanity is and how not to destroy it. Now for the genres, it's a science fantasy. It has a very huge science fiction feel with alternate dimensions and stuff like that, but the abilities of the spirits almost seem magical in nature, hence the science fantasy. It also tends to be a comedy. Lots of ridiculous situations, especially in how the spirit's adapting to human life, their relationship with Shindo. It's also, though, to a good degree, harem, because guess what? They all like him. There you go. Now I rate this one a 3. It's not really huge on my list, but I thought it would be interesting enough to talk about it when it came to playing an BESM game, so that's why I tended to leave it in here. Speaking of which, if you are using a BESM game, I recommend 500 points. So you're make your characters spirits. Most of them will have the majority of their powers and abilities sealed away by a particular human. A human that all of them will be developing some kind of relationship with. This is where it comes into building a character that's important, because this is how your game master will establish things. You can change the dynamics around all you want with this kind of thing, but it's a human in a relationship with a spirit, binds their power, and makes them more human. They have to deal with, they still have those powers. They might be sealed away, but the seal is not necessarily permanent. And so these powers can still manifest, and they can cause damage and destruction. So they have to deal with their own destructive natures and powers, and the damage they could cause to humanity, along with the various organizations which might be out to kill them, and other organizations which might not be out for their best interest, and even the forces which seem behind the reason why spirits manifest in our world, the reason why they're here causing the destruction they do. So let's move on to Gokukoku no Brynhildr, or Brynhildr in the Darkness. So as a young boy, Ryoto was obsessed, connected with this young girl, Kuroneko, who believed in, well, aliens, and constantly sought to discover and find them. But in a terrible accident, Ryoto was horribly injured, and Kuroneko was killed. So when we come to Ryoto as a high school student, he has become obsessed with finding aliens. He wants to do this for Kuroneko, who he still remembers fondly, and pines for the fact that he could not be with her when she passed away. But then something odd happens. A girl who looks exactly like Kuroneku, only now hit the age that she would be at, appears in class. Now, she denies being this person, and it just seems like a coincidence, but he goes to a little bit of a session there, and following her, discovers that she has superhuman strength, and she can predict the future. So the connections between the two of these seems to change, and lead Ryoto into an interesting relationship with her and her story. Now, for the genres of this one, I call it a science fiction. It has very heavy science fiction elements with experiments and laboratories and mysterious things that might be possibly alien, extra-dimensional. You're unsure. There always seems to be a hint of something unworldly out there. But in a way, it's also a dark fantasy, because there is an almost supernatural feel to the powers that this girl has, and the others that are like her, that Ryoto discovers along the way. And it's also very dark because there's a lot of involved with death and negative effects of these powers. The powers cause problems, and all of them are slowly dying because they have them at the same time. So there's like this darkness and heaviness to it. Now, it also is actually a harem, though, which is kind of odd. But Ryoto is so kind to these girls, to every one of them, that they all tend to like him and enjoy his presence. And so it creates a kind of harem element there. Those that he meets and bonds with want to be, with him to a degree. Now I rate this one a 4. I enjoyed this one quite a lot. It was very interesting, and the dark elements weren't so depressing I couldn't push forward through the series, because that sometimes will drag me down. Now, if you're using a BESM game, I recommend 400 points. You're going to make your people experiments. Members of this experiment which have been given these powers. And if you wish to, as a game master, you can include an NPC human who can be sort of the side of reality in their relationship. And the relationship as it developed, any kind of harem elements or connections there, completely up to you to add in. That's not important here. The important fact is that these people will be hunted. There will be those that will be after them. They may try to live and integrate in a real society, but they have their abilities. The fact is, each of their abilities will have a negative side effect for using it, something that degenerates them. And they'll have to worry about death itself. Taking a medicine and finding more of a medicine which keeps them alive. They will be escapees from this institute, from these experiments, and have to deal with those that would hunt them that were part of that experiment still. Maybe even some members of the experiment which are sent after them who are promised more, because if they hunt others that have already escaped down. Or deal with the experiment itself and the legacy it has on them and the effects it has on them, and dealing with what it is that the experiment is. These factors can become very interesting to deal with within a game. But let's move on and talk about the two from this season, Youkai Apartment no Yuuga no Nichijou, and Shoukoku no Altair, or Altair, a record of battles, which is where we're going to start. So we're on the western part of the one continent, one of the major continents of this world, and we focus on Mammut, who is an orphan who became orphaned over the course of a war. He becomes a pasha, the youngest one seemingly ever. A pasha, a position of power within the government of his country, within the control of his country, who helps to work for the people. A title that is given, similar to that of a knight, almost like a knight or a lord. Now, he seeks to prevent wars from starting. And at first he ends up getting involved in a number of incidents of those that would incite war between his own country and an empire on the other side of the continent. An empire who has been growing expansionistic, taking over places, and seeks an excuse to go to war with other countries and take them over. He defuses this situation, but learns of this want of expansion and conquest of this empire, and eventually decides to travel the world, exploring it, meeting with other countries, and building an alliance. And using this alliance, opposing the empire finally, going to war against them to prevent their expansionistic conquest of all these lands, putting himself in a vital role in this entire conflict, a conflict he would have rather avoided, but circumstance forced him to go to that which he despised. Now I'd call this historical fantasy. There are elements within this that match with various countries in historical fiction. Mahmud's country is very similar to the Ottoman Empire of our history, but it's also got fanciful elements, interesting elements like that, that make it this historical fantasy. It's also adventure. He travels the lands, visits various places, meets people, and these adventures he goes on. In a way, though, it is also drama. There are dark things that happen, the results of war, the death. You can see it not only in his own history, but in those things that he faces along the way, and the fact that he seeks to prevent orphans from being created, but his efforts seem almost meaningless at first, until he has to reach up and realize that he cannot avoid this. He can only mitigate the worst parts of it. Now, I rate this one 3. There are some interesting elements to it, but I'm not the biggest fan of the dramatic parts of it, and I think those can push forward a little too much in my mind, hence why I don't rate it as much. Now, for using a BESM game, I recommend 175 points. You're going to make your characters a group of young Pasha, who get into a situation where they decide to oppose the Empire, and help their country to oppose the Empire, whatever country you make it be. And forming alliances, traveling to other countries, building a network of people that can oppose this powerful force with a massive military that probably outnumbers them by a great deal, figuring out ways to not only create great circumstances before the battles, but perhaps even involve themselves in the battles and help lead them to victory, are what makes up this game. Almost 2 halves of it. The tactical nature of alliances and adventuring, and the war part of battling. And combining the two of these in an interesting manner might be what makes the essence of this anime great for your game. So let's move on to the last one, Yokai Apartment no Yuuga no Nichijou, or Elegant Yokai Apartment. So we focus on high school freshman Yusha, who ends up needing an apartment after the dormitories burn down. And it'll be a while before they're rebuilt. And the fact is, he is an orphan who's been living with his uncle and his family. And he doesn't want to impose on his uncle and the family anymore. He has for longer than he would have wished. And so he doesn't really have a place to go. And he keeps seeking an apartment until he finds one for, well, cheap. Pretty dirt cheap. Pretty good price. So he decides to take up that offer. It's something he can afford, something he can get to in short notice. But when he moves in there, he discovers this place is not only home to people like him, mortals like him, but yokai. Ghosts, spirits, supernatural creatures. And it's an apartment where the two of these mix in their almost everyday lives. Now, if we're talking about genres, it's of course supernatural. There's yokai, spirits, ghosts. There's mystery to involved in some of the things that he discovers along the way when dealing with these people, dealing not only with the yokai and the ghosts and spirits, but those that also live in the apartments too, mysterious natures to it. It's also to a great degree slice of life. We have him going to high school, dealing with his normal life at the Yokai Apartment. It's slice of life because we just see his life going through this. It's just that his life is weird now. Now I rate this one a 4. It's a very interesting one, and it has some great elements to it that I find enjoyable. I would definitely recommend it. Now, if you're using this as a BESM game, I would recommend 200 points. You're going to make your characters mortal residents of the Yokai Apartment. Now, they will have their normal everyday lives, what they do for work, school, whatever your characters will do. They could each have their own different things that they're dealing. But they're living in this apartment, dealing with each other, dealing with the yokai that live in this place, the relationship between them and the yokai and people in the yokai, possibly new residents coming in, having them deal with their meeting of the yokai or whatever, and whatever it would be that considered normal life here in the Yokai Apartment. Everything that's going on that deals with them, each other, and other residents that might be there, whether new or old. But that's it for this week. So I introduced you into 4 more anime series. Each of these, I've given a number of suggestions on how you could easily put them into your BESM game, including just base suggestions and some statistics. You could take the base suggestions and make your own world in any gaming system. The system itself, adapting it and however it needs to be adapted, is up to you. Whatever you need to do to stat the characters or the mechanics, completely up to you and how you adapt them. But the base suggestion, the base idea of the world and how to play in it, I've given that to you. BESM's the one that I've recommended the most information about, but you can really use it for any role-playing game system. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Show support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you want to check out my Patreon, link in the description below. There's some great rewards there, helps to grow and improve the channel and the Empire. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.